Hi, everybody. My name's Katie Curtis. I'm from the Bainbridge Island Historical Museum, and it's a delight to be here today for this program that is in partnership with the Senior Center, Arts and Humanities, Bainbridge, and the library today. I want to welcome all of you, and part of our welcome is to do the Acknowledgment Statement for the Suquamish tribe for the land on which we stand. So I just want to read that to you. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is within the Aboriginal territory of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Here, the Suquamish people live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. And our program today is a program designed to welcome people and help people connect to the community. And today we have a very special, wonderful presenter, Joel Sackett. And he probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but we're going to watch some of his beautiful slides, and then we'll have Inez. Inez, hi. She's going to watch the chat. And so if you have questions, you can pose the questions in the chat, or once the presentation is over, we're going to welcome your questions and comments. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joel Sackett. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Katie. Yeah, I'd like to start, I guess, with a little bit of background, beginning with when I came to Bainbridge. My family and I have been here since 1990. That year, I continued working as an editorial photographer, and I was gone for many weeks at a time. And I continued doing that for a couple of years until I realized it wasn't the right way to live here or the best way to live here. Because every time I would come back, I didn't really know anybody. I didn't know my way around. I couldn't even get home at night from the bar, you know. So I didn't know the roads. I didn't know people. So I decided at some point to, about 2 years in, to build a studio and to focus more on local work. And part of that, most of it really, was a way to make a connection with the island, a very personal one. It turned out that a lot of other people needed the same thing. They needed to find a way in. We're talking about the people who, most of us were not born and raised here. We came here from someplace else and we needed to connect. So every year for about 10 years, I did an exhibit at what was then the Winslow Hardware and Mercantile store in the windows, and every year was a different aspect of the community, and it went from there. Those were good exhibitions to work on. I got around. I met people. I made pictures and I shared them, and it was different than sharing this. So that's how it started. Each exhibit took on a different aspect of Bainbridge Island. And in a way, this body of work now is a continuation of that. This is about the built environment, which turned out to be mostly about older homes and people's stories about them, memories, history. In some cases, it was about whatever facts I could find in the public record. And so there were a variety of different sources, and I just let the project kind of take on a life of its own. And that's what we're going to be looking at. There are going to be quotes and anecdotes and brief stories, and you know, some of those quotes will be unnamed. People chose not to have it attributed to them, and that's fine. Same thing with locations. We like our privacy on Bainbridge Island, apparently, and I get that. Sometimes some of the best locations remain undisclosed. So let's go to the first image.
Thank you, Joel.
Okay.
we're excited.
Good. So I'd like to start with a few images from the Suematsu farm. It was one of the first places that I visited 30 years ago. I had the honor of meeting Akio Suematsu working in the field that day. And he didn't stop what he was doing, but he also didn't mind giving me an earful about the government, both the local and the federal government. And I thought that day that Bainbridge is an interesting and a very complex place, and I'm lucky to have landed here. So this is Akio's family's home that was built in 1928. The whole family lived there until the internment. They came back at different times because some were drafted into the army and some stayed in the camps. They farmed together briefly under the name Suematsu Brothers. By the late 1950s, all the siblings except Akio moved on, mostly to other farms. And that was told to me by Karen Silvar, a farmer on Bainbridge Island, who many of you must know. This house was also used in recent years for farm interns. Right now, I don't think it's being used for anything. It needs some work. So also, I want you to take a notice of the chimney has a little sculpture on top, which is made up of Akio's old tools that a couple of farmers did. And you're only supposed to notice it if you notice it. Otherwise, it's sort of a secret piece of farmer art, right? So
Very, very cool. Thanks for letting us in on it.
There you go. So, and there's a monkey tree there. So that's always good. Okay, so let's go to the next image. Okay. John Garfunkel, who is the founder of Educulture, had a lot to say about these cabins that are on the Suematsu property. And I'm glad I recorded it because it was a long visit and conversation with John. So I'm quoting John here. The story of these cabins have relationships to many aspects of our community. Who lived here, why they came, their relationship to the community at large, and within their own unique community, the marriages between Canadian Native women and Filipino men. Also, the architecture is very similar to that of the barracks that the Suematsus were forced to live in at the concentration camps. These cabins are not the originals, and now I'm just speaking, not John. They burned down once, and they were rebuilt possibly by Akio and his father, or just his father, or just Akio. But again, when things are not recorded, they become the story becomes it has variations. So we don't know exactly the history here, but you can see there's two more cabins in the back. And also, next slide, next image, a couple of outhouses to the side here. Now, outhouses are largely disappeared on Bainbridge. They tend not to get refurbished. They fall down when they do, and that's that. The first outhouses I saw were after I got a call from Walt Ball, who many of you might know, and he invited me to come to his property to look at a couple of outhouses, and he said that one of them was a two-holer, and that was a pretty interesting outhouse. So so these are the outhouses that were used by pickers that were staying in the cabins. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay. This cabin says Sinn Féin on it, and that was done in recent years. Sinn Féin, as many of you know, is an Irish Republican political party. And I thought, well, that's an interesting juxtaposition. Why would that be on a cabin like that? And asking around to some of the farmers, apparently it was a young farm intern of Irish descent who wrote that. And I've just always been fascinated by it. So back to the story of the cabins. When the Canadian Indians would come down from March until the at least the end of summer, Akio referred to these cabins as Indian camp. Each farming family had a relationship with a native family and would arrange for transportation from their reservation to the island and back again after the season. The cabins tell the story of multiple relationships between the white community, the Japanese American community, the Native Canadian community, and the Native Filipino community. So there's a lot of history contained here. Okay, let's next image. Undisclosed location and person. Kind of a little under the radar, this one. It was already 25 years old when this trailer was brought to a local farm in 1990. Since then, it's been expanded and served as a home for several farm workers. There's a dire need for better and more affordable housing for interns and young farmers in our community. Under the radar housing solutions are not solutions at all. They are part of the larger sustainability issue facing local farms. So, as you can see, I'm reading because I looked at all these images and I wrote notes and I had a lot of quotes. So, okay, let's go to the next image.
You're doing great.
All right, Katie, thank you. Thanks for that. This cabin was originally built by Iggy Dega in the late 90s when he lived in his Volkswagen van next to the old main house. Again, undisclosed location, but this is Julie Rosenblatt speaking. He built it on top of an old round yurt platform, which he squared off to build his cabin on. He lived there for some years, followed by a few others. Now it's a shelter for some goats. So repurposed, lucky goats, a nice place. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here's a vacant house story. I heard from the present owner that this vacant house was inhabited by a Japanese family that went on to camp during the war and never returned. I also heard that it was a Filipino family that lived there. As was often the case, the Filipino family was entrusted with caretaking homes and farms while Japanese families were away at the camps. This could be two parts of the same story. Okay, next image. Okay, on the same property in the back, I found this tool shed. But I also found out that it was moved there from a different location, and it was used as a two-room home for field workers. So I stepped inside, and there was a partition, a wall between the two doors, and I imagined what that was like living as a family inside that structure. Okay, next image. Okay, this is Trent Gibbons speaking. It's called Tale from a Kitchen Window. I've heard some stories about our house, like it was purchased in the 50s because it was the only house in the island for sale that had running water, and that it was rented by musicians in the grunge era and hosted parties for those folks. In 2005, someone took a picture from our kitchen window of a bear, which made the front page of our local newspaper. Wow. Now it just feels like our home. They'll leave that up for a second. Okay, let's go to the next image. This is at the end of Lovegren Road, 8000 Lovegren. It's the, there's a sign outside that says Bainbridge Dairy Farm. Rebecca Slattery, a farmer who is now in Indianola, used to live here, and she gave me the following quote. I first found the house at the Pritchard's final yard sale in 1988 or 89. Mrs. Pritchard had died, and her lonely, grieving husband was finally giving up the old farmstead and moving to assisted living. I bought all Mrs. Pritchard's handmade dresses, and years later, after I became a renter of the house, rehung them in the closets. The down comforter I had bought at the sale went back to its bedroom. I hauled the jars full of canned goods up from the root cellar, dumped their dingy contents, washed each one, and refilled it with applesauce made from the abundant trees which surround the house. And another paragraph she wrote to me at a different date. Through the 90s, the 1990s, the house was shared by a sequence of young women. There were many lovers who drifted through our lives. There was heartbreak after heartbreak, and bouquets of wildflowers left on the doorstep. Okay, next image, please. This is the blacksmith's house, and this was told to me by Linda Heineman. Built in the early 1900s, this home and property originally belonged to the blacksmith, Mr. Johnson. The garage, still standing, was his workshop. The house has seen a few additions, remodels, and improvements over the years. Since 1967, the Hatto family has raised children, pets, livestock, and a garden here, surrounded by the best neighbors in the world. Thank you. This was written to me by Anne Waring. My mother, Irmgard Grabo, built this cabin in the 70s, partly from trees growing on the property. My sisters, friends, and I helped peel the logs. It cost about $500. My mother lived there for about 15 years until she had her present home built in 1989. In 2017, 42 years later, I rejuvenated the cabin so that I could help my 90-year-old mom continue to live in her own house about 200 feet away. Okay, next one. Susan Sellen wrote to me and said, "This old house has been in my family for almost 30 years now. It was a gift from my dad. It is an ever-changing canvas, a humble hermitage, the benevolent backdrop to my life, and always my shelter, especially in these times as the world erupts around us. There's no place like home." Okay, next one. Paul Swarnick, a tuna fisherman, a good friend, wrote to me about his house. And he said, "This quaint little structure was originally built in the mid-30s. It started out as a 3-stall barn for horses. In the 1980s, it was converted to a workshop on the main floor, and a small studio apartment was added upstairs. In the early 2000s, it was completely restored and again remodeled into a small home. It has a footprint of about 500 square feet." Okay, read next one, please. This little building was once a chicken house, built from lumber from the old Port Blakely mill buildings, sometime around 1940. At some point, it was added on to and converted into a small dwelling. And across the street, next slide, is Betsy, a lifelong minimalist. By her own description, moved into this 624 square foot house on West Blakely Avenue in 1977 with little more than a backpack. She bought the house from a couple, the Johnsons, who bought it in 1953 from a bachelor fisherman, Julius Johnson, no relation. He might have built the house sometime between 1901 and 1925. It was considered a slum because it wasn't up the hill and collected all the neighborhood's rainwater. Some of you who have lived this vanishing life might recognize some of these places. Next one, please. Okay. Decades ago, a woman gave birth in this old scout troop bus turned hippie home right here on the island. Eventually, the bus's engine froze up from lack of use, and it was towed to a new location, tucked in and built onto. It served as a man cave for artsy types. Adding a structure to a trailer or a bus is quite common in Alaska, but it's unique on Bainbridge. Those are not my words, but I can't tell you whose they were because it's a kind of under the radar scene. Okay, and near that is the next image. This place has a name. It's called the Cabian. It was designed and built by a woman carpenter in her 50s using repurposed wood. The red color is from a previous incarnation. Its footprint is less than 200 square feet, which at that time made it okay to build without a permit. Certainly a tiny house in the true sense of the word.
Yes.
I think it's used for like a writer's retreat also. Okay, let's go. This house is in town. You've probably seen it. And John Mames is speaking. He's on the front porch. And he says, my mom, Karen Koltoff, is the 4th generation in this house, and I'm the 5th. The land was given to Hattie Lee Grow and John Parfit by Ambrose and Amanda Grow on their wedding day. The house was built by John Parfit. I love this old place. I'm just the caretaker. It's good to be connected to your history. I've got to say, inside this house is like a museum. There are just the photographs and memorabilia and so much going on. And I never got back to it because of the pandemic, but I will. Okay, next one. Sometimes I use Facebook to post images, including some from this series. I look forward to the responses, especially if they contain good memories and say something about the time and place. I also like when people get in touch with suggestions. I follow all leads. This one came through Facebook Messenger. Quote, hello, I'm Melanie Perry. I'm enjoying your appreciation of what was. Would you consider photographing the house I grew up in at West Port Blakely, a historical home over 100 years old? It will soon be reconstructed by the new owner. And I wrote back and I said, yes, I'd love to do that. And then I sent her this picture. And she wrote back through Messenger and said, our family considered our home to be like paradise. So our name Perry became the name of our home, Paradise. Dad Ron Perry taught a Saturday class to Islanders for years in Aunt Martha's church, just a street over from the end of our driveway at that time. Oh, what fun we had. Such love in that old farmhouse. If you've driven to Fort Ward, you notice on the right a home that was once a church. It still looks like a church. So that was the church she was talking about. Okay, next page. Next image. Now this place is no longer standing. It was photographed probably a year ago, and now I don't see it. The Anderson Homestead may be derelict now, but has a long and wonderful history, and is a house with a lot of heart. Nancy Rico, a writer who still lives on Bainbridge Island, interviewed John Anderson, who was born in that house, lived his whole life in it, and eventually died there. The property is, or was, somewhat magical, with a stream wandering through the cedar forest and the tall grass meadow. The large tree is actually a black walnut, which had been brought in a covered wagon more than 100 years ago from the East Coast. Beneath it, in the spring, a carpet of crocuses bloom, so thick you can't walk without stepping on them. The most incredible poppies used to bloom near the road. There was a productive plum tree, enough blackberries that in the season I would make one, sometimes 2 pies a day, and a patch of raspberries beside the house that has survived the years of neglect and continued to fruit for us once my mother began tending them again. An owl lived in the woods and would swoop over the meadow at sunset hunting for field mice. Yeah, I like when a photograph can conjure all those memories. Okay, let's go to the next image. This is a remnant from Meg's farm off of 305. Possibly a milking shed, vanishing into the blackberry bushes. George Anson Meigs, pioneer, lumber baron, shipbuilder, established this dairy to supply the Port Madison mill town with low-cost products for its workers. He was also the owner of the mill. Excuse me, the dairy survived until 1951. This recalls a time when agriculture and industry were intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some of you have been there.
Again, a place with many wonderful blackberries.
Many blackberries. Okay, next one. Couldn't find out much information about this place. I finally found a neighbor down at the end of the road, the end of the driveway rather, and he said that this cabin was owned by an elderly person, and that person, when that person died, their family members were so overwhelmed with grief, they just left the house exactly as it was. I don't think they're on the island. They just walked away from it. Okay, next. Gonna let this sink in for a second. A neighbor who grew up across the bay in Port Madison shared what he knows about the Maples, as it was referred to in Seattle newspapers during the mill days. Interestingly, this Westport Madison site was first used by the Meigs Mill Company to house and feed oxen to pull and skid trees out of the woods. Another example of agriculture and industry working together. In 1861, a large 4th of July celebration was held there, said to be the first major July 4th gathering in the Puget Sound. Port Madison was the official county seat and had a larger population than Seattle, and is memorialized by a stone plaque that's still there by the local Daughters of the American Revolution. The house is registered as being built in 1914. The original owner is unknown. Following World War II, it was purchased by the Shibayama family. Mr. Shibayama saved money from working in restaurants at the time. He was so determined and frugal that he also purchased the Bush Hotel on Jackson Street in the International District. His family used the home for family gatherings and holidays only up until the late 70s. I remember visiting Michi Scotta on Bainbridge Island, who mentioned that her father had owned the Bush Hotel. There's an amazing story about the John Johnson family, one of the first families to have lived in the house, and their dramatic role in a major crime. In 1902, they were kidnapped by renowned hole-in-the-wall gang member and escaped convict Harry Tracy. The entire caper can be found online at history.org. It's a long story. So, famous crime happened here. Okay, can we go to the next one? Now, this must look familiar to most of you. It's not a house, obviously. But the story is, as told by Bart Berg, my grandfather, Sam Clarke, was a developer of Meadowmere starting around 1965. I worked there all during high school and college. Around 1971, he asked me to build a structure that could also hold a sign announcing Meadowmere. So I designed this bus shelter using cedar trees for the structure. The state wouldn't allow a sign on the highway, but they would allow a sign on a bus hut or cabin. What are they called? Bus shelter, right. So when that falls down, I don't think it's going to be replaced. Okay. This is Phil Shively's place at the head of the bay. This used to be a garage and is now an equipment shed at the head of the bay. We're talking about the older structure with the Virginia 5 sign on it. It was built in 1936 by Jacob Book, the superintendent of the creosote plant. It's well made with 3 sliding doors using concrete treated wood and shingles. I bought the property in 1975 from Jake Book's daughter Florence, who worked at Town and Country as a checker for many years. And to the right of this house and shed, next slide, is this boat shop. The boat shop was originally a barn. The lower level was a chicken house. The second level had stalls and a manger for cows and sheep, and the third level was for hay storage. It was turned into a boat building shop in 1978 by Nathan Smith and Scott Sprague. Bryce Powell is standing in the doorway of this photo. He's one of the very best boat builders in our region right now. It's hard to imagine this place as a manger. Okay. Dana Quitzlin told me about this project that his dad took on and that the family enjoyed for many decades after that. He talked mostly about how it was built. He said the wooden foundation of logs radiating from the center were squared up on the wood miser saw. Never really knew what a wood miser is. The floor of thick planks likewise. The cedar siding was also milled on the wood miser. At one corner of the gazebo, there's a little door into a tiny chamber that was once a bathroom, now just storage and cobwebs. It had a chemical toilet with a lovely view of Mount Rainier. Cool place. Okay, next image, please. This is not so old, but it's pretty unique. And this is Heine Jocelyn, who told me that this place is called Etsuan. And Etsuan was built and has been open to the public since 1995. The meditation leader is Shozan Osho, Dr. Mark Jocelyn, and his wife Myodo Heine. The architect was Ron Konzak. The surrounding landscaping was created by Myodo. The purpose of Etsuan is to foster Zen Buddhist practice in the lineage of Kyozan Roshi, who brought this form of meditation to America in 1962. Because of the current virus, our usual meetings have been temporarily supplanted by Zoom get-togethers online. Okay. So, Gail Smith, an activist, a seaman, water dowser, and much more, is an island legend. After building his cabin, he decided that he needed a basement, so he started digging a hole inside the living room. The soil from that project became a mound from which Gail then burrowed into to make the root cellar. Okay, next, please. The former parsonage at Port Madison Lutheran Church on December 10th, 2019, 100 years after the parsonage was built, the home was sold for $1. And on February 19th, 2020, the house was lifted from its foundation and moved 1/3 up North Madison Avenue to its new location by the Canada-based Nickel Brothers, who specialize in moving homes. I think the reason why this home could be moved was because it sold for $1 and only had to go 1/3 of a mile. Let's look at the next one. This is pretty recently. I posted this picture on the Facebook page, You Grew Up on Bainbridge If, trying to find the story of this house, even though I passed it and most of us passed it hundreds of times. There were 66 comments trying to recreate a timeline of who lived there when. Susan Erickson, the granddaughter of the original Erickson family for which it was named, and a resident of that street for 73 years, made the final comment. The big white house on the corner of Erickson Avenue and Wyatt Way is being saved and moved across the street. The land that the house was on was sold. They'll be building on that land, Winslow Progress. But so sad it just can't be left alone. That was the Hanson house. So happy they didn't tear it down. A piece of Winslow history. So again, this got to be saved because the move was literally across the street. Okay, let's go to the next one. This house was at 4565 Point White Drive. I couldn't find any information about it, so I went to the county records. And according to the county assessor, the structure was built in 1930 and is a single-family dwelling. The two-story building has a roof clad in asphalt composition shingles. The form of the building is a single-family house. It's retained a high level of integrity and is a good local example of a 1930s era Tudor composite style residence. It's noteworthy that this house, constructed across the street from the Linwood Center, used a similar Tudor architectural style. Next image, please. It didn't make it. It was almost saved, but the cost of moving was prohibitive. There was a couple that wanted this house, but they lived a couple of miles away. And even if it cost $1, it could easily cost a couple of $100,000 to move it that far or more. So it had to come down. Next image, please. I imagine that this structure was a cabin for seasonal workers, a place to live. But these two kids from the neighborhood passed by, and I asked them if they had heard anything about it. And one of them said that she heard it was a farm stand owned by a Japanese family. This is on Holly Farm Road. So I still have a hard time imagining that, but and I'm not 100% sure it's right, because it kind of looks like a place you could live and not a store. But the other side of it was completely open, so it might have been a store. Okay, next image.
Cute.
A friend told me to check out this little cabin way back in the woods. It was about 8 by 8 feet and looked like an old abandoned tool shed. When I saw her again a few weeks later and gave her my impression, she said, "No, definitely not. Years ago, there was smoke coming from a wood stove inside. There was definitely someone living in there." Okay, next image. There's an old logger's cabin somewhere in the Peters Tree Farm area. It's now part of the open space trail system. The interior of the cabin has some sort of shrine with religious icons and spent candles and assorted objects. I found out that over the years, including fairly recently, people have squatted there. It was a little creepy inside. You can see this if you enter on Listening Road off of Baker Hill Road, just up from Linwood Center. Don't know how the cars get back there. Did the forest grow around the car, or did the car get driven and abandoned in the forest? Okay, next, please. Katie's dancing. This is Irene Clarke's place. And she told me that 32 years ago she moved in. It was originally owned by Millie Pritchard, a local school teacher. It was part of the Bremerton shipyard, maybe officers' quarters, she thinks. One of several that were barged over sometime in the 30s. A huge cement block that was the anchor is still out in the water that you can see at low tide. Irene said, it's perfect for me as one person. I love the living room light and the privacy from being surrounded by trees. It's the most comfortable place I've ever lived in. Also, it's the birthplace of pickleball, named after Pickle, the dog who liked to chase wiffle balls back and forth. The story is well documented and at the Bainbridge Island Historical Museum. Katie, is that true? Was it named after Pickle the dog?
You'll have to come to the museum to find out the ins and outs of that story.
Yeah, perfect.
We do love that story, but there are other
variations as always. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Next image, please. This is Rob and Janet Sennett's place. Janet told me, Robert and I have lived in the park the longest. We've seen many people come and go. In September, it will be 31 years for us. Rob and I have built 3 pop-outs to our mobile, which are all usable rooms. We live in a wonderful community. Everyone works together. This is the Islander Mobile Home Park, of course. And they're right up against Progress. Okay, next. That's Michael Wynne Jones in the photograph. He wrote to me something very thoughtful after I showed him this photograph. He said there's a cycle of rejuvenation that takes place as buildings age. Some are considered disposable and are torn down to make way for progress, while others, like our cabin, go through cycles of repair and use over the years. It has a great feeling of stillness and resilience that we hope to preserve along with the antique timbers in the next round of strengthening and preservation that is needed soon. So you can see that's the new house they're building next to it, but they're keeping this log home and working on it. Okay, next image, please. Kind of in contrast to that, as far as building goes, is this vertical log structure home. And Diane Jennings wrote to me about their family's home. My mom has owned this house since 1965, but it's been in the family longer. Previously owned by my father's family. It was built in the 1930s for a summer cabin. There used to be a dock in front of the house that the mosquito fleet used. The house across from us was the community center, and a house up the road that was recently demolished and rebuilt was known to be the grocery store and post office. So it seemed there was a whole little town going on there.
Mhm. That was definitely common with the mosquito fleet. Wherever
Mhm.
there was a dock, there's a little town right there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next. Coming to the end, and this is my own place. This was a small art studio that was built for our very young daughter at the time. It eventually fell into disuse and was completely covered by blackberry bushes until last summer when some goats for hire on an adjacent property got through to ours and ate as far as they could reach, revealing the lost art studio, which is the next image. So I hadn't seen this structure in many years because it was completely covered and then revealed by goats. Okay, the next and last image is our home.
Mm.
There aren't too many manufactured homes left on the island. This one's ours. I never imagined living in it for over 30 years. It's very lived in and cared for. I found out that the property used to be a pig farm, and next door was Bear Ass Pond. The latter sounds like good times for island kids. I'm really grateful to have this nice metal roof over our heads and a place to call home on Bainbridge Island. And that's all I got. I'd just like to thank everybody who came today,
Mhm.
and also everybody who invited me to their property to do this. And yeah, thanks very much.
Well, definitely. We thank you too. And I hope you can hear the silent thank yous and claps.
It
And
is
things
pretty
like
quiet
that.
on my end, I'll tell
It
you
is, it
that.
is. That's what's a little bit unnerving about these.
Yeah, I'm
Mm.
unnerved. I'm unnerved.
So those were beautiful, beautiful, Joel. And it was like kind of backing into a fairy tale, you know, and
There's so much more out there too. You know, it really surprises me. So much has disappeared and so much is gone. Of course, I'm sorry I didn't start doing this when I was first came here, but there's still a lot. There's still a lot out there to see. A lot of it's hidden, but it's there. So
it for me, it paints a picture of Bainbridge Island being very eclectic, kind of, and actually having a feeling of being more inclusive than our stereotype is, you know, right now.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so there's a way in which it feels more connected to the land here, you know, or
mm-hmm,
very
mm-hmm.
connected to the land. And
But
it's,
it's still there. You just have to search a little harder, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's like hidden. It's not gone,
it's
actually.
hidden. Yeah. It's hard to go down these long driveways if you're not invited. So part of it is, you know, finding people, talking to people, asking if you can come over. And that's been really hard to do in the pandemic. So this project that I thought would end by now is really just on the back burner and will continue when it's safer to go out and visit people. So
Well, it's wonderful history to know. We have about 10 minutes, and I do want to see if anybody has any questions. We have some folks that have written some things, and just some appreciation here.
And we have both Ned Thorne and Marilee Mostov have raised their hands.
Great. Okay, Ned, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Joel. Good
hey
to see
Ned,
you.
nice to see you.
Yeah.
Where are you? There you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm right here. We're here. Rachel and I are here in LA.
Hey, hi.
Joel was very kind enough to take a couple of photos of us on our wedding a couple of years ago, and it was
Couple hundred, actually.
it was out on Point White Dock, which is another
Yeah.
wonderful structure that's still around. But
It's still there.
yep, and they're great. You in the middle, you talked about a couple of these houses that were, one was saved by moving and one was unfortunately torn down. But they would seem to be sold for $1, or at least one of them was. And I'm just interested if you know more about how that would happen. I'm just, the experience on Bainbridge is not selling houses for $1. It's usually a lot more than that. So I'm just curious if you know why those houses, is it because they were simply so old and couldn't be restored or had no value?
I mean, it takes quite the right, let's say, couple or individual that wants a house that old that maybe comes with, some work to do for sure. And then knowing the cost of moving is what changes everything, right?
Yeah.
If it's $200,000 to move, plus it needs work, then it needs a really unique couple or individual to take on that project. So whoever's selling the house really just wants to see it preserved, right? So they try to find that person, or they put the word out that that's available. Now, if you can move that house a very short distance, and it doesn't cost that much, then maybe it wouldn't be $1. So I think there's a relationship there between that astonishing $1 and the cost of moving it.
I'm sure. Yeah. I live on Old Creosote. I grew up on Old Creosote Hill Road.
That's right. Yeah.
They moved. At one point, they moved this old brick house. They barged it over from Seattle. It's a historical home, sort of a Tudor style, and they moved it up that hill, up on Old Creosote Hill Road, and down again into this little dip around the corner. And it was amazing to watch this whole. It's a brick house, so you can imagine it just crumbling.
Right.
And they got it done. It may have been the same people. I don't know, the brothers you mentioned, and I have no idea. But it was an incredible thing to see this old house inch up our hill, foot by foot.
That's incredible. That sounds like a magnificent house, probably a really beautiful house.
Mm-hmm.
So there must be some deep pockets in that story somewhere.
Yeah.
So these dollar houses that need to move are like really super modest, So it's a whole different thing going on. Come on back. You're in LA. Come on back.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry. I just wanted to say that if you come down, I know, Ned, you've been to the museum. Good to see you. But we have pictures of course, our own schoolhouse being moved too. And so we had that dramatic photographs of moving houses and things like that. And I was so touched about the woman who had bought all the dresses and then put the dresses back in. It's just, there are so many very unique stories that
a little over the top,
that show a real deep connection to what history can mean to people, and what places can mean to people, and so that was just that was just lovely. I think there's another question from Mara Lee. Do you have your hand up still?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Marilee Mostov. I work at the museum with Katie. And I just wanted to say thank you, Joel, so much. I really enjoyed listening to you, sharing your stories, and encourage all of you to know, first of all, that this was a challenging project for Joel, I think, in the last year with COVID, because Brianna and I insisted he talk with people that, who knew something about these places. And during COVID, you could imagine how challenging that was. So shout out and thank you to Joel for persisting. He persisted with that. And Joel came in on his own while I was in the basement and installed all the photographs. And I didn't really look at them till last week, Joel, when I was installing all these nice labels and quotes that you wrote. And I spent a lot of time in the gallery really enjoying these photographs. And what I want everyone to know is this was a fun talk, but they are so beautiful in person, Joel. They're just, it's a whole other experience to see some of them. Some of my favorite ones are they're people poking out in the garden or coming out. So
the prints are a different experience. Absolutely.
They really are. They
Yeah.
really are. So I know we're not open now, and hopefully you're all paying attention to when the museum is able to open again someday on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And when you feel safe to come out and check them out, I hope you will.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to get sort of a measure on that Linwood home that was removed in the development and that Tudor style. I'm just curious with the Bainbridge Historical Commission, at what point did they sign off, or do they sign off in permitting the removal of that structure? Was that before the developer purchased the land, or did it come later?
Well, I think those kind of questions, I'll let Joel answer if you know, but I think those kind of questions are more for the Historic Preservation Commission than for the Historical Museum. But Joel, do you happen to know if—
No, I don't know that information. It's a really good question. I know that I wanted to photograph that house. I heard it was coming down. So I talked to the developer, and we went back and forth a bit of what my intentions were. Because that house was coming down, and they were sort of in a way responsible for that loss. But it's development, and you have to make, a room for that. That's not an answer, I know, but there is an answer there. She would know that, or you could probably go to the county and find out what that process is.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brianna from the
Hi,
museum.
Brianna.
Joel, thank you very much for doing this for us. I wanted to just jump in. I'm actually on the Historic Preservation Commission, and I just wanted to mention that it's kind of a case-by-case basis what happens to some of these homes. So it's totally dependent on not just having a buyer who's ready to take on, moving a home, but it's also, working with developers and architects that care about historic preservation and are willing to work with the commission to try and find ways that they can preserve what's on the site, whether that means moving it or building around it. So it's kind of two ways. It's not just the people who purchase the homes, it's also the architects and the builders that, oftentimes our job is to convince them that it's worth saving those properties.
Right.
And sometimes it's not for them. But I also wanted to just jump in and let everyone know that the museum is having our annual meeting on Saturday, this coming Saturday. And I put some information in the chat box, but you can also find info on our program on our website and a link to Zoom. It's going to be virtual. An hour long, really easy and fun to jump in, and we're going to be honoring our history heroes this year. So I encourage anyone, you don't have to be a member of the museum, to join, learn a little bit more about what we've been doing and how you can get more involved. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Brianna. So wrapping up, Joel, I just want to say again, thank you so very much for just all the wonderful heart work that you do to make incredible artwork. I know you're an island treasure, and so it's an honor to have you sharing all of this with us. And I do believe people will be inspired to come on over to the Historical Museum. And I kind of love the way everything's hidden away, that there's respect, for the owners of the places or even the history of the places. And you've added to kind of the mystery too. And so I appreciate how beautiful. And
well, I hope everyone becomes more curious about history and goes out and finds it. The museum is a great place to go to get a concentrated amount of history, but you can actually just go out there and find it. It's there, and it makes a good field trip. And the history is alive. It's out there. So. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody. I know I've got a lot more work to do. The pandemic has really slowed down the project. I've got a list of about between 20 and 30 properties that I didn't get to visit yet. So this is going to continue.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to continue. Well, that's
absolutely
great. Joel.
Okay.
That's
okay.
really
Well, thanks, Katie. Thank you, Reed. Thanks everybody.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming.